And speaking of war and peace, I want to share with you a snippet from a very interesting discussion I had earlier today. We were at the Raisina Dialogues. It's the flagship summit of India's Ministry of External Affairs. In conversation with me were some very interesting speakers. There was Teodoro Locsin Jr, Secretary of Foreign Affairs from the Philippines, Bildt, the former Prime Minister of Sweden, Stephen Harper, the former Prime Minister of Canada, Baijayant Panda, the National Vice President of the Bharatiya Janata Party, and Holl Lute, former Deputy Secretary of Department of Homeland Security of the US. And we were talking about liberalism in today's context. Naturally, the conversation pivoted towards the war in Ukraine. Someone said, Russia's invasion of Ukraine marks a return to the 1930s. Another speaker said, countries always pursue national interest, and it's nothing to be embarrassed about. Listen in. What does the war in Ukraine mean for the liberal order? Is it proof of its demise, or is it the opportunity for its revival? Does the world see this war as a demonstration of what the alternative to liberalism would be? And if yes, what explains the victory of Viktor Orban in Hungary, or the rising popularity of Marine Le Pen, even though she lost the election?
What's at stake right now is not whether you focus on liberalism or you focus on democracy. What's at stake is the definition of we. Who exactly is the we we're talking about? And what we are seeing increasingly, whether it's in autocratic regimes or in movements that are reacting to an overreach, whether of the progressives or what are termed liberals, they are redefining the we. And in many cases, in my view, it is very much the 1930s again.
You want to talk about the 1930s. This is actually the 1930s. This is essentially a fascistic nationalist government in Russia invading a neighbor with total disregard for any kind of legal framework, international or otherwise, and trying to deny its right to nationhood. As I say, that is the 1930s over again, and there is a tendency for us, because Ukraine was or is a democracy, an imperfect democracy, but Ukraine's certainly democracy, Russia is certainly not. There's a tendency for us to say, well, now this conflict is between democracy and authoritarianism. And certainly in Europe, and certainly in the West, we have seen, I think, a revival of the notion of shared values and what that really means when we face something like Vladimir Putin's government.
Bildt, your comments on the need to dispense with hypocrisy.
Well, others have been sinning in the past, so we have the right to be sinners now. Well, you never become a saint by the sins of others. And that is also why it's so important to react when nations suddenly sort of opt out of the system, say that we don't respect fundamental rules of the international games, and the most fundamental rule of the game is that you don't invade other countries, you respect the territorial integrity. Then you must react.
I'm going to put this in the context of something you mentioned a little bit earlier. First and foremost, we have to engage with and dispense with hypocrisy. When nations who buy more energy from Russia in an afternoon feel free to moralize to nations who buy less than that in a month, they may be playing to their own audience, but there are billions of people who will not buy into that.
If Taiwan is getting threatened by China directly through the military way or through different methods, will the world democracies stand with Taiwan?
You may see democracies more likely to unite when their national interests are threatened. You're discussing using Russia to beat down China. So what we're talking about really are national interests, and that's not anything to be embarrassed about.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.